Hello, this is Aaron with iBoard Data Recovery. Today I'm working on an iPhone 12 Pro Max for data. The customer said she dropped it just from like waist height onto the ground and the phone stopped working. And she took it to another repair shop, and the repair shop reported that it has CPU damage. And you can take a look at the motherboard right here. And this is not CPU damage, this is technician damage. So the board looks fine where it wasn't touched. So this is underneath the shield. This is the opposite side. They split it, which they didn't do a great job of, but that's okay. It looks like they tried to replace the charging IC, and when they were replacing it, you can see their tweezer marks right here where they were holding it. But when they were replacing it, they also just like slipped like that, and it pushed all of these components all over the place. They probably pushed it and something else and caused a huge mess. After doing this, they told the customer, "Oh, sorry, when you dropped it, the CPU became damaged. Yeah, it's really unfortunate. That doesn't usually happen on such a small drop. But sorry, the data is gone forever. There's nothing you can do." Luckily, she kept looking. She found me. I actually opened up the board while she was here, and I kind of showed her what exactly happened. Anyways, that's not really important. The important part is whether or not I can get the data off of this phone. So let's take a look at the damage and see what I can do. So if we look at that area on this iPhone 12 Pro Max, sorry about my voice, by the way. I lost it a couple of days ago and it's still a little hoarse. This is the area that's damaged. This is my charging IC. And I'm just gonna like kind of look at what some of these things are to see how important they are. Because I don't need this phone to work forever. I just need it to turn on enough for me to pull data. And if some things aren't that important, I don't really need to replace it. I can just clean things up by removing it and only replace what's actually necessary. So this chip, so I'm not really sure what this chip does, but I believe, yeah, it looks like it's something to do with service. Oh yeah, for sure. So I'm almost sure I don't need this chip on here, so I'm just going to remove it, and any capacitors associated with it also don't need to be there. So I think my plan of attack is going to be to just clean up first and remove both of these chips and replace whatever needs to be replaced. So aside from all of this, I also noticed it has a VDD main short. So if I take my DC power and I put the probes on the battery connector, I'm getting an immediate amp draw. When I first opened this up, these shields were on here, so I didn't realize that this was such a mess. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have even given it power. But I also went ahead and just measured on main. When I do that, I'm getting a short. So main is short, but I believe it's going to be in here. Yeah, so there's main under here and here and here. So yeah, there's a giant solder ball underneath this chip. So some people would see damage like this and they might think, oh, this is going to be too difficult. You know, we should just probably try a CPU swap. I don't think that is the case at all. I think this damage is still relatively minor when it comes to data recovery. When it comes to repair, this would be a lot harder, but for data, I think I should be able to do this fairly quickly. I don't think there's going to be any lines permanently damaged, but I'm not 100% sure of that. I'll just kind of have to see once the work is done. I do think it's quite irresponsible for repair shops to try doing these microsoldering data recovery jobs when they don't have the the abilities to do that yet, because you can definitely permanently ruin this customer's chance of recovering data if it's damaged in the wrong way. So if you do watch like these videos and you want to learn, I think that's great. I think data recovery jobs specifically aren't really the place to be doing that though. Phones can be replaced, but the data can't really be. This cap looks like it's just associated with this IC that I'm not going to replace, so I'm just going to remove it. I moved my fume extractor a little closer so it's kind of louder. So I don't know how that's going to sound exactly yet. My hot air's always been loud as well. So let's see if it's still short. I'm able to remove components in this area pretty easily. But that's because I've spent like thousands of hours underneath the microscope. Like, I'm not too worried about the PMIC when I do work on it. I did already notice that they had a few solder balls from when they were working here. Still got this. But if you notice, like when I'm using my hot air, it's a skill that's taken for granted a lot. Like what I'm pointing at is what should melt first. If that's not what's melting first, that means you're not aiming correctly. And that skill is actually quite hard. And like I said, it's taken for granted. You think it would be easy to point, air at the, at the component, but a lot of times you think you're pointing here, but you're actually pointing like a little bit lower, a little bit higher, a little to the side. So that's a skill that takes a lot of muscle memory to develop and to use like without much thought. Otherwise, you should be thinking about it a lot. Okay, so I still have a main short, and I think the main short was the initial problem. I have to remember that whatever the technician caused, they were trying to solve a problem, and they didn't solve that yet. So I think a main short may have been the original problem, because that can happen off of a small drop. So let's see if I can find where a main short might be. I still have a few, at least one component touching right here that shouldn't be. And heat control is also very important. You don't want to let things stay melted too long. I only try to let things stay melted for, a second or two if I can help it. A little bit longer if I have to, but never more than a few seconds. Okay, main short is clear now. This last little section was still bridging. That's funny because that's not even main. It's a line that connects to main through this coil, I think. Let's see, it goes through a resistor, through a coil, through this chip Yangtze, but I don't know, it doesn't matter. So main is no longer short, that's good. So I'm not 100% sure what kind of amperage draw I should expect with the charging IC off. Maybe just 0. But if I have a short on the board, I'm wondering if it would still give me any other spike or anything. So I'm going to test the amp draw. Yeah, and it's not doing anything. That's, I'm sure, to be expected without the charging IC on the board. So I'll see if I have a new one of these. I think I do. And I'll replace it, and let's see if that's all it needs. I'm pretty sure I don't need this. I do hope this is all it takes. And data recovery jobs can sometimes be, or oftentimes, a lot easier than actually repairing. But the cost is you have to be more like proficient, and you have to be much more careful and conscious that you can't do anything that will cost you your customers' data. So I didn't do anything other than remove and replace this one chip. I would love to see if that's enough, and that's all this phone wants. So I'll clean it and I'll check with my DC power supply what the boot sequence looks like. So let's see what happens. I'm going to take my probes, put them on the battery connector, and I'll prompt it to boot by shorting the power button. And I get nothing, no amp draw. So now I'm probably at the original problem, I would assume. So when I see no amp draw, there's a few things I'm going to check. Well, I have to make sure that enough things are here to support my charging IC. While I'm at it, I should probably check for shorts on my power rails. And I should make sure my boost coil is not loose, because that happens a lot on this model, which is this one. It doesn't look loose. So I have to go off the assumption that either this chip's not working properly, or I'm at the initial problem, which still needs to be solved. I kind of think I should be getting more out of the board, even with how messed up this is. So I'm going to go off the assumption that that 0 amp draw is going to mean I have like a shorted power rail, or even just a missing power rail because of a bad coil or something like that. So I'll start diagnosing off of that first, just as quickly as I can, before I go back to trying to look at the charging IC, if I have to. And I could always measure voltages to see if anything's turning on at all. But first, let me just do quick diode mode checks of these lines around the PMIC and around NAND. Okay, that didn't take long. This third capacitor is measuring short, and it's measuring full short, not partial short. Let's see if that's the only one. If it's not the only one, then I almost surely have also PMIC damage. A lot of these other ones seem fine to me. So that might be the only line that's bad, which will be good. So let's see what this line is. So the line was the third capacitor right here. So that's not a good line to see short, because that is the PMI, or that is the CPU possibly. There's a few things over here, but this isn't a good thing to see. So So I'll see if it's possible that one of these capacitors is the short, and then hopefully we'll see that it might be the PMIC that's short, and hopefully we don't see the CPU as short. So I think I'll try to inject some small amount of voltage into here and see if we can see where the heat might be going. So I'm only going to inject probably 0.6. First, let me see what kind of amp draw that will give me. Should be pretty small. Yeah, so 0.4 amp draw, that's definitely enough that I should see some heat. So let's just see with freeze spray if anything heats up. If I can't see with freeze spray, I also have the thermal cam we can try. I like to use both. Thermal cam can be unclear, freeze spray can be unclear. It's just both to use best. It's best to use both. So I still don't know if this is the original problem or if this was caused afterwards while the tech was working on it. I didn't see anything clear, so I think I will use the thermal cam, but just in case, I'm going to remove the capacitor that I was injecting into. I just don't like it. Doesn't look great. It's probably not the problem, but just in case. Yeah, that was not it. So let's use the thermal cam. Yeah, so I'm not seeing much heat show up. So I think I would have saw some heat if it was a capacitor. Sometimes it can be harder to find when it's the actual PMIC or the CPU. So this is hard because this chip was probably overheated and it's directly on the other side of the PMIC. I could remove both of these coils, but just to make sure it's not on the capacitor side, but I just don't think it's on the capacitor side. So I guess I'm gonna have to remove this PMIC. The good thing about this one is the customer has already approved CPU swap price if it comes down to it. The bad news is I don't really expect this would be solvable if it's caused by the CPU. I don't think there's like a solder ball underneath there that's causing a bridge. If it's short, it's because it's internally damaged most likely. So this is a bit interesting to see because I think these are like overheating explosions underneath the chip that happened not when I was pulling it, but I think this was what happened when they were working on the other side, because I don't usually see solder like this. Usually when it pops off like that, things aren't automatically bridged, and like even then, like the vias are even tinned, which is pretty strange. Like this one too. So once I clear this, I do expect that line will clear, and hopefully the initial problem has been solved at some point. I don't really know what it was, but this was almost surely caused by the other technician as well. So all these like traces and pathways don't usually get tinned like that on a normal PMIC removal or any chip removal. I think that normally happens when you're overheating from the other side, like I was saying before. So I think everything that's connected now is probably supposed to be like, there's these little pathways that connect these two. Like right here, you can barely see it, but that got tinned. So now there's like a full solder path. So everything that's connected, I think, is like that. So it should be fine. But that should mean that this line is no longer short. And as long as this is no longer short, we have a great hope of recovering data still. So unfortunately, this is still short. The thing is, when you see damage like this under this chip, there can also be damage like that under this chip, which means that the CPU doesn't necessarily have to be internally damaged. It could be bridged because of some sort of little solder explosion like we saw here. So that does mean I'll have to remove the CPU and see if it's recoverable or not. Okay, I didn't really think I was going to have to do a CPU removal on this one, or CPU swap. And now it would have, I suppose, looked smarter to go straight to doing the CPU swap to save all this time. But if I didn't have to do that, I don't like to. I like to do it as a last resort just because it's more sensitive just by nature. And not most of the time, but a lot of the time, I can solve difficult problems like this. I guess I will say most of the time I can solve difficult problems like this directly on the board without having to resort to the swap. But it's nice to be able to do both. I can diagnose and I can solve what I can, and when I can't, I can just swap it if it's necessary. So I'll just make sure that none of these pads for sure are this line and ground, and then I'm going to have to remove this, but that will be done tomorrow. So I'm back today, it's a new day, and I'm going to go ahead and just start with this CPU removal to see if we can find a way to clear this short. So the very first thing I want to check is if this line is clear. It should be clear now because there's no bridges down here. Yeah, so the line is clear now. So I'm going to have to find the corresponding line on the actual CPU and see if it's still short after I clean up these pads. So I'll clean these up and then I'm going to match up the line to where it is down here on here. And if it's still short, then I can verify, it's within the CPU and I can't do anything about that. But I'm not sure if some of these connections were caused by my removal or if they were possibly the actual damage that had occurred from the other tech. So I'll be able to tell that once I clean it up. So this should be easy enough to find a point to measure. I use this one, ground's right next to it, towards the outside. So it'd be 1, 2, 3. This is no longer short. And that mirrored would be this one. And it is short. So this is internally short in the CPU. So that's pretty weird. I didn't really expect that was going to be the case. But that's pretty convincing. Let's see. Let's make sure, double check I was measuring the right lines because it's kind of hard to tell sometimes. Yeah, so this is the line. This is the line, not short. And then measuring the line on here. The third one to ground, short. full short, not partial short. Just so you can see, I'm not working with a partial short, because some of these are low resistance lines and they would beep short. This is a full dead short. It's as good as ground. So I thought this phone was going to be recoverable, and at least I didn't have to do a full CPU swap. I was able to identify which line is actually bad, and I was able to verify that it's bad within the CPU. So I don't have to go forward with the entire swap and see, because it's not going to work with that line short. I do, when I have to give up on a phone, I do like to provide proof that it can't be recovered. And that's what this video will be. This line is short. There's nothing I can do about that. There's no way to pull data when this line is short. There's just nothing that can be done. In regards to how this happened, you know, the other shop did report that it was the CPU, and it is the CPU. But I don't know that they were able to determine that themselves, because the work in this area was just really, really bad. And it looked like they overheated this area, which then, you know, overheated the PMIC. That's why we have all these like solder like pathways. And I thought that may have overheated the CPU enough to cause this short to occur. Because the original issue, she said, was a drop. And I wouldn't expect this line to just die within the CPU on a drop. It's really hard to determine what actually caused the short to appear in the CPU. There is a 4-volt main rail right next to this voltage line underneath the PMIC, and it's possible that those somehow got connected from the heat from the work on the other side. However, I don't really know if that happened. It's just kind of a guess. So unfortunately, this one's going to be unsuccessful. Sometimes they're just not recoverable, and I do think it's important to show the unrecoverable ones, because it does happen. You just can't, sometimes they fail in ways that are just not recoverable. There's nothing I can do. So thanks for watching. Bye-bye.